As they say, all great things must come to an end, and after 11 straight victories, the Jets have finally run out of just a little bit of luck. But what a ride it has been all the way towards the playoffs.
You're Locked On the Hockey Jets, your daily podcast on the Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey friends, and welcome to tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Harrison Lee, an avid Winnipeg Jets fan and an online blogger. You can follow me on Twitter at HLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. Thanks for making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day every day. If you like what you're hearing, be sure to like, follow, and subscribe on all of your favorite podcasting platforms and YouTube. Doing so, of course, is always free of charge and ensures you never miss another episode. Most of all, though, we just love and appreciate your support. Tonight's episode, we are talking about the 11-game winning streak and its unfortunate conclusion on the second half of a back-to-back against Nashville. But, all good things have to come to an end. I think if you told anyone that the Jets would set a franchise record and get to 11 wins, they literally would not care. They would have taken it any which way it happened. And what a ride it was all the way through to now. But, the first game against Ottawa was an interesting one. The Sens were kind of beat up coming into this game, and you heard my preview episode, hopefully, with Alex Adams from Sportsnet and the Behind the Play podcast. He was talking about the Sens team just kind of not really being healthy. Anytime Ottawa has had a good streak of things going, immediately somebody gets hurt, and it's usually a pretty big contributor. Guys like Brady and Norris and, obviously Ullmark just coming back from injury. I mean, it just seems like no matter what happens, this team is just cursed. I sort of joke with Alex that I think the Sens are not legally allowed to be good, and that unfortunately seems to be a trend that continues. I don't know why they've been cursed to be this way, but Ottawa, they just could not really seem to find a way through. And, despite a couple of really good chances and honestly some loose play from the Jets at times, Winnipeg ended up having the better of it. And Hellebuyck just kind of did Hellebuyck stuff, right? Connor Hellebuyck, only surrendering one goal, generally locking things down pretty tightly. And Winnipeg's offense kind of did the rest. Cole Perfetti getting on the board, lots of good depth scoring up and down the lineup. I mean, it was just a game in which Winnipeg, look, they weren't going to play the cleanest outing, and I think that did kind of show in some of the defensive lapses. But you had, Kyle Connor and even Appleton getting an own goal credited to him. And I think the Jets basically just kind of came in. Their whole goal was to take care of business, be reasonably good enough. And I think the Jets were generally that. As the game wore on, they did start to take over more. And eventually Ottawa just, I think, ran out of steam. By the third period, the Jets were pretty much just piling shots on. And, at that point, it was kind of over. So the only things that I think people would probably take issue with really kind of stemmed from the power play. And the power play has now gone fairly scoreless the past couple of games. You had two back-to-back 5-on-3s on consecutive evenings, and the Jets have not scored on either of those. Probably a little concerning in some ways, but I think the biggest thing is, the Jets power play right now, just from, some observation is that maybe some of the skating off the puck hasn't been as aggressive. Some of the rotations haven't been as fast. And it feels like the Jets are maybe clutching the sticks a little tightly. They've hit the post a couple of times, hit a couple of crossbars, and maybe they're slightly overthinking things. And it's kind of leading towards a power play that looks more like the previous years than our current one this year. Is it something that I really expect to last? No. And as weird as it is to say, maybe the power play going a little bit stagnant in the week right before the trade deadline isn't the worst thing. If you can prove that you still need a 5v5 scoring boost, maybe the front office will pay attention and go for that. So on the one hand, you don't want to say that a power play not scoring is good, but maybe it's informative for the Jets to make the right trades. So we'll have to see how they react to this, but a couple of dry streaks here and there, I think anyone would probably take that if you still had a power play that was like number one in the league, right? So this game, against Ottawa, the Jets could have folded at any point, 11 straight, a huge record, an impressive streak, one of the longest in league history. I think the absolute longest is 17 games. So getting to 11 in the modern era is pretty darn crazy, but Winnipeg has pulled it off. And it really, again, was a game in which the Jets could have folded. They could have choked, and they didn't. They rose to the occasion. They were pretty darn good for the most part, and they got the job done. So I think that that's just been a nice mentality shift this year. And even if the Jets fall behind early, you still feel like at some point they can get themselves back into the conversation, keep the game interesting, and at least in the previous games, against St. Louis and the Sharks, they actually won. So, this game thankfully didn't require a comeback victory. Winnipeg got in early and took care of business, but just one of those outings where it's, maybe not the cleanest, maybe not the most perfect, but at the end of it, the Jets ended up being the much better team. And, no matter the defensive giveaways and stuff, Hellebuck was there to kind of sweep up the rest. And eventually you kind of got through this game. And I think in some ways, as we start nearing the playoffs, that might be the most important thing. Get through, no injuries, get your wins, do what you need to do, make sure you secure a home ice advantage. And if you win the President's Trophy along the way, fantastic. I'd be disappointed if the Jets don't get it. I feel like it'd be a really due reward for the hard work this year. But again, it's not like the most important focus. It is really nice though, and it would be very cool if the Jets get that at least. I don't really subscribe to the whole President's Trophy curse, and I wouldn't worry about that. If the Jets lose in the playoffs, it's probably just because they came up against a team that, maybe had an answer to what the Jets like to do. So it won't be because of the President's Trophy curse. That much I feel is pretty certain. If I'm really happy with anything in particular, I will say that Cole Perfetti just continues to prove my faith in him right. Cole had a great tip-in from an Ehlers feed, beautiful net front drive, and I think Perfetti this year has really grown his game. He knows he's not the fastest. He knows that his skating, definitely has some issues with it, and so he really compensates with his brain. The dude is such an aggressive forechecker, and he understands spacing and timing really good. His passes are fantastic. His ability to sort of pick off opponent passes and counters and create offense out of that is fantastic. He's just a really hardworking two-way forward, and I really feel like his game, especially along the walls, has grown by leaps and bounds. So very good to see him thriving. There was an article from The Athletic suggesting that if the Jets were to try and trade for maybe a Casey Middlestat, Cole Perfetti would be part of the deal. And all I can say is I wanted to bleach my eyes. I never want to see a proposal like that again. And, I don't know why people would even think that this could be a possibility. I mean, you're talking about a player in Perfetti who's already been a roughly 40-ish point player, playing almost like barely third line minutes, more like fourth line minutes last season. He's a young 23-year-old. I think the team really likes him. I know that they haven't exactly committed to him long term, but I think that will come here pretty soon. I guess it's just a question of how much and for how long, and I hope that Perfetti himself is wanting to stick around. But great game. The Jets got their 11th win, and it was nice because the following evening, just tonight, unfortunately, the winning streak had to come to an end. Back-to-back in Nashville, another road game. You had 3 and 4 nights, probably not super shocking that at some point the Jets winning streak did have to come to an end. We'll chat about what transpired in this one and, whether the fan reactions were really justified or not. But before we dive into Winnipeg versus Nashville, maybe you should dive into a fresh bag of coffee. If you're like me, your mornings have to start with a good cup. But I got tired of settling for grocery store brands that just weren't cutting it. If you've had them, you know what I mean. They kind of taste a little watery, very artificial, not that great. That's why I turned to Trade. And let me tell you, this coffee is next level. Trade is the #1 specialty coffee marketplace in the U.S., bringing you fresh coffee from over 50 of the country's top roasters. Their experts have taste tested thousands of coffees, curating over 450 amazing roasts. Whether you're new to coffee or know exactly what you're looking for, they'll handpick the perfect match for you. The subscription makes it so easy. There's no more last-minute grocery deals, and you don't have to go out. All you have to do is subscribe, and you'll get a really good bag of coffee. And if you don't love your first bag, there's no problem. Trade will replace it for free until they get it just right. And look, we're all very particular. If you're a coffee drinker, you'll understand the right balance of darkness, the intensity of the roast, and those little earthy, nutty flavors that really make a difference. All of that really contributes to the perfect cup. And so Trade helps you find your favorite brand new flavor, maybe your new favorite roaster from another state. It's a great option. And right now, Trade is exclusively offering our listeners 40% off your first order at drinktrade.com/LockedOnNHL. That's drinktrade, TRADE.com/LockedOnNHL for 40% off your first order. drinktrade.com/LockedOnNHL. Go get yourself a cuppa. Hey friends, and welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day. Every day, thank you so much for rejoining us on tonight's episode as we are just sadly recapping Winnipeg versus Nashville. I was really hoping greedily that the Jets would come away with 12 wins, but it is what it is. You're going to have to lose at some point, and second half of a back-to-back in Nashville. Funny enough, the Jets have lost in Nashville twice this year. It's the only team that's beaten Winnipeg twice, I believe. So, yeah, I don't know how that happened, but the Jets just kind of fell a little bit short. This game felt like, especially early, Winnipeg was just really fighting it. I think Winnipeg was really struggling to get their skating legs under them. The 5v5 offense was a little bit stagnant, and the power play, again, kind of went a little bit of a donut. So a second straight night of a 5-on-3 having the same outcome as it did against the Sens, no goals. And, I'm sure Winnipeg is getting a little bit frustrated. Payne has tried to make some adjustments since the goalless streak has been continuing for the past couple of weeks, but, I wouldn't really stress out too much. I think that there are some small things that they can do. I think the biggest thing is just having more confidence and getting the skating back, right? I think when the Jets start moving off the puck more, that's usually when PK Diamonds start panicking. You get those opponents moving, you get goalies cheating, and suddenly things open up for you. And I think that's, such a key ingredient to the Jets power play, that deception, the speed, the chaos. Winnipeg is a team that really lives off of that. At 5v5, I wouldn't say Winnipeg was awful, but, this was one of those games where you just can kind of tell that you played the night before and you've been on the road a fair bit. So Winnipeg really struggled to just find consistency. I would say the best period was probably the second period. Winnipeg definitely started to claw back into this game. They even scored themselves a nice goal. And so you thought, maybe here, towards the middle of the game, Winnipeg would start to really come back into this one. But it just felt like no matter what the Jets did, a goal was just out of reach. Saros, for his part, made some really big saves. And, at the other end, Comrie did about as much as he could. The first goal that he let in, I don't think he'll be happy about. Forsberg had a bit of a muffin kind of go through Comrie, and I don't think Eric will love that. But then Eric also robbed Forsberg much later in the game on an insane toe save. So, I think he more than compensated and redeemed himself. Frankly, if you only give up like 2 goals, you probably give your team as good of a chance to win as anyone. So really can't complain about his performance. He's been very good for the Jets as a backup, making league minimum money. And, for a guy who's going to rest Hellebuck hopefully a little bit more over the stretch, it'd be nice if maybe the Jets could reward him with some run support. But unfortunately, that wasn't tonight. I think Winnipeg, they still need a little bit of juice, right? I will say that Arneal went with Stanley and Fleury as a defensive pairing, and I just, yeah, that went about as well as you could expect. There was a particularly key play where Stanley was like, I don't know if he got caught between two minds. He tried to aggressively stop a counter and instead took himself out of the play, basically gave up a 2-on-1. And it was all that, Mason Appleton could do to basically skate back and stretch out and dive to block what was actually basically a goal. Comrie was leaving a fairly open gap trying to cut across, and it should have been a goal for the Preds, but Appleton bailed Stanley out big time. So, yeah, Logan continuing to play is definitely something. I don't want to sit there and put one player on blast, but Stanley every game is kind of doing this stuff. And I think at some point the coaching staff is just going to have to realize that. I don't know. If Logan was like a 50-50 player, I don't think I'd really be that worried about it, but he's like a 30% guy most nights. 30%, not really doing it for me, man. And then you put him with Fleury, who's not great himself, a guy who's more like a 40% kind of defender. It's probably not going to have a great night. That's all I can say is you're probably not going to have a great night. So, um, the Jets kind of maybe put themselves in a bit of a tougher spot already at the start of the game. So I just kind of wonder, even if the Jets acquire a defender who quite reasonably could play for Stanley's spot, will Stanley actually get benched? I am increasingly not convinced of that. So that's a little bit of a concern. Stanley continuing to play at 5v5 is one thing, but he often takes penalties and he's used on the PK a lot. So that's kind of not ideal. It makes a third pairing position suddenly a much more higher leverage role than you'd ordinarily see. And for the Jets, they just can't really afford to have too many weak links. If somebody is just actively struggling, you don't have the roster skill, across the board to sort of compensate for that. The Jets have to get as much as they can out of every position. And it's not really fair that they have to do this, but it's the truth. And so at some point, I don't know if the Jets are going to reckon with this. I think if we're to see the end of the Stanley experiment here in Winnipeg, it's going to have to be an executive decision. And by that, I mean a trade. I think the coaching staff really likes Logan. I think the room probably does. But, at some point, if you really are a meritocracy, if you really are talking about earning your ice, someone's going to have to just be honest and say that Stanley has really struggled to get the job done. So I don't know who's going to make that call. I don't know if Winnipeg is even capable of making that call. I've never really seen a single player in Winnipeg who fans pretty much across the board feel like isn't getting it done, and yet who somehow seems to be unbenchable. That really doesn't happen that often, and so it's just fascinating that for some reason Winnipeg is choosing to die on the Stanley Hill. But I just hope that once the playoffs roll around, that Winnipeg doesn't, lock themselves into this. If they do, it's not going to be a great time in the postseason. Thankfully, you're not going to be on the PK as much as you are in the regular season, but I just don't think you really want to continually put a piece of wood in the spokes of your tire. Like, if you're riding your bike, why would you actively try to trip yourself? Don't make it harder when you've got some players who can probably do the job. Benching Miller to me just doesn't really make sense. I know that he's not been amazing, but Collins, a perfectly fine third pairing guy. You don't have to try and reinvent the wheel with this third pairing to make it work. I don't know. It is what it is. Winnipeg, for all of the great things that I think they've done this year, they've got a couple of really strange and random blind spots, and I just hope that those blind spots don't cause them more grief in the playoffs than they need. And I think that's why this upcoming trade deadline is going to be a really important one for Winnipeg to get right. I think you can do stuff to mask some of your worst tendencies, but how much you can get away with is debatable. I will say that I think you can get away with more this year because the rest of the league is not that great. There's only a couple of teams that I particularly worry about, and it's like the Vegases of the world, and even the Knights are not as good as they've been in previous seasons. I say that they're up 5-3 over Chicago right now, but comparatively speaking, right, the Knights were scarier in other years. So do I want the Jets to go for depth moves? Probably not. I think you need to swing a little bit higher. But I will say that I think in some ways there's maybe a little bit more allowance for some issues, even in the playoffs. But I don't think that margin is huge. And I also don't want the Jets to just assume that. I think you have to prepare for every contingency because the playoff field is super favorable for the Jets. This is about as good of a run as you could possibly have. And so I would say go all out, right? And I want to talk a little bit about that because it does sound like we're hearing a lot of different reports about what the Jets are after, who they're after, and I want to address at least a couple of the rumors and suggestions and kind of try to speculate on what Winnipeg's angle here is, because I think the Jets are playing the market the way that they usually do, and I think that what we're hearing from the media may not really be the full picture. So we'll chat about that in just a brief second. But before we do, did want to let you know about our friends and partners at FanDuel. When the game tips off, the NBA action is just getting started, and there's no better place to get in on it than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. With FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game, so even if you miss the opening tip-off or you want to bet on a fourth quarter comeback, you can always stay up to date on the latest NBA action. And if you're looking for a bigger payout, be sure to combine your live bets for a same-game parlay. Personally, I've used FanDuel once, and I thought it was a great intuitive software. I thought it was very easy. The app is very convenient. It's safe, secure, and fast. And, if you're maybe watching a Jets game and perhaps Winnipeg is down in the third period, might not be the worst idea to put a couple of bucks on a Jets comeback, because the Jets actually lead the league in comeback wins. They are tied right there with Washington at 19. So I think that there's a really good chance that you could actually come away with a big win. And if you bet those $5 right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if that first $5 bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Hey friends, and welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Every day, thank you so much for rejoining us on tonight's episode as we are chatting about, the calm before the trade storm. And the Jets are increasingly getting linked in a lot of conversations. Winnipeg is very clearly shopping, but we have heard multiple versions of what they're shopping for. Now, I'll say this. I think Pagnotta's suggestion of a top six forward and a depth defender is probably more in line with what I think the Jets should do. If they can make that depth defender a really good one, all the better. An Alexiak, I think, would be a perfectly fine target. Players of that caliber, I think, would very clearly be an upgrade for the third pairing, and hopefully a player that Arniel would trust and would maybe replace Stanley. I can't guarantee that, but, I, in theory, do think that that's a possibility. Where I start to have some questions is the reporting from either Friedman or somebody else that Winnipeg was talking to Montreal about Armia and Evans. Now, the Evans link has been made before. He's a solid forechecking, grindy fourth-line center, but kind of in the same way that I look at Lawton, not really a needle mover and not good enough for what the Jets, quite frankly, need. Winnipeg aspires to be a bigger, stronger, more skilled team with speed, and Evans does some of that, but not enough. And Armia at this point is just kind of a solid depth guy, but not really a player that I would ask a ton from. And so what I kind of see happening here is similar to what I see them doing with Philadelphia, where the Jets are leaking, their interest in something, and they're really targeting a different kind of package or a different level of player. When the Jets have done this in the past, it's usually to play the market up for some, abstract target. And instead, Winnipeg quietly goes behind that and tries to get a cheaper deal somewhere else. Maybe they're not doing that this year, but that's usually how Winnipeg is operated. And so I'm going to continue to believe that the Jets have something bigger in mind. I guess I'm just curious to know how big and who are they wanting to deal with. Utah, for me, right now they're up 6-1 against the Wild, but Utah's playoff picture doesn't look great. They're a team that I think is going to fall out of the playoff bracket here very soon, and I think that their ability to remain in the wild card mix is going to start to decline. I don't think that they're an awful team, but they've had too many injuries and they've been inconsistent enough to where, I think they should consider selling. And if they were to maybe try and move like a Dursey into Schmaltz as a package or something, I think the Jets should be very intrigued in something like that. Dursey, very clearly a top four upgrade. Schmaltz, a very, very good attacking forward who can also play at center, whether you want him at wing or center. Or center, he's got good vision, and he's large enough to where I think the Jets would actually like using him. You've also got a question of a Barrett Hayton, who's been doing really well. And so I think the Jets have loads of options, and that's just one team. I think Winnipeg is talking with a lot of squads. It sounds like Philadelphia is not going to be trading Ristolainen, which I think is bit of a bullet dodged. Risto, I think, would have been fine in Winnipeg, but I just don't think he would have been great. And if he cost you like a first round pick or something, that's not really great. I think Risto would have been a decent, second pairing kind of guy, and maybe he would have precluded the Jets trying to re-sign Pionk, which, by the way, they are apparently very aggressively going for that. I've got a lot of thoughts about that. I might save that for a different episode, especially if they actually sign him at some point. But for Winnipeg, I think the biggest thing is making sure that you get this 5v5 offense a sizable upgrade. I think you can do that either by upgrading the mobility on the back end or going for a big scoring wing. But I think the quality of the defender is also really important. Jake Wallman could be a really good option for your third pairing. Alexiak, I think, is pretty solid. There are guys in that tier that I think are available for like not loads, and that's great because I think the Jets, in my mind, really should spend on bringing in another big forward too. I've seen some debates on this, and some folks feel like a bigger defender is more of a need. And I'm kind of like of two minds because I don't disagree that the defense needs a significant upgrade, but I also look at our 5v5 offense and I think that there's a lot that's working well, but there are still like one or two areas where they really need improvement. And I think adding a top end finisher would go a long way towards making the most of the, chances and stuff that they already create. So for me, Winnipeg, I think their definition of depth and what others may be calling depth is perhaps not aligned. Monahan and Toffoli may have been considered depth, but they were like two really good top six guys who, sure, stylistically maybe weren't the best idea to bring in ahead of a very fast playoffs, but in isolation, the prices you paid, what you got out of them during the regular season, they fit in pretty darn well. So if that's what, Chevy considers depth, I like that definition a lot. If it's more of the Lawton type depth, that's where I would have issues. But I don't know. Irrationally, I have a lot of faith in the team this year. I think the front office has shown that they do, to a degree, understand the moment, and they've talked about it about as much as you're going to get out of them regarding this kind of stuff. And so I want to express cautious optimism that the Jets are ready to take the next step. But again, we're going to have to kind of wait and see how they play this. Winnipeg, I think, is going to probably keep things pretty close to Friday. I think next week we're going to hear lots of rumors. I don't think we're going to see a trade till late. That's sometimes how the Jets have operated. Last year, they got Monahan early. I don't know if they need to do that this year. But maybe they jump the gun. Maybe they go in to try and jump the market a little bit. But I kind of feel like with all the rumors that we're hearing, all the leaks, and the way that we know the Jets usually do this stuff, I think they're trying to pump up certain parts of the market and come away with some steal somewhere. Whoever Paul Stastny is of this year's potential either expiring contract status or somebody with maybe a year or two left, let's go and find that special gem for the Jets and put this team truly over the top. But curious to know who you think would fill that role. I think Baton or Schmaltz or Barrett or Schmaltz would be fantastic for the Jets, but maybe Winnipeg isn't going to be able to get one of those guys. We'll just have to wait and see. All I know is let's stay away from the Shen brothers. I saw that rumor. No. I didn't even think it was worth talking about because the answer for me is a no. And if that's the direction the Jets go, I think they're going to be sorely disappointed. But let me know your thoughts on this. Who are you hoping the Jets acquire? Drop your thoughts below or at my social medias at HLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. For tonight's podcast, though, that is going to be all the time that we have. Thank you so much for listening and making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day every day. We'll see you back here tomorrow with a preview of Winnipeg versus Philadelphia and more trade deadline coverage. So see you then. Have a great night. And as always, go Jets go.